Good morning, everybody. My name is Nick Gowing, an international broadcaster. The panelists are joining me, and given what Andrea was saying earlier, it is important that you make sure you are connected on the app or on the iPad that you might have as well, because we want to make this feel as conversational as possible. And we've been hearing, obviously, and you know so well about the difficulties there are with many of the nations we're talking about, particularly because of oil and energy prices. But from those difficulties come new opportunities, and that's what this is about. Yes, there are difficulties. Anything can happen, as we know from the overnight news about maybe trying to fix the level of output between Russia and Saudi Arabia. We're not sure what that means, but the calculations that have to be made are complex, uncertain, and we wouldn't be talking like this maybe a year ago, given the new realities that all of you face. But this is not just about a crisis, it's about new opportunities. It's about new synergies, and that's what we want to do in this first session. And please do use the app. It's a great way for me knowing, and the other moderators, to know from you the kind of things that are on your mind as you listen to the presentations and the remarks, although we're going to have a conversation this morning which isn't based on presentations as such. I'm joined here on the platform by Jean-Marc Peterschmidt, who's Managing Director for the Countries of Operation and Chief Operating Officer for Banking at the EBRD, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. He's been at the bank for the last 23 years. And Ruslan Alikhanov, who's president of Argo Investment, based in Russia. He is actually, though, Azeri, but he's a Russian citizen. I'm going to ask them first just to explain what they do, and then ask them after that the kind of assessments they're making. And please, in the limited time available, don't sit on your hands. Get engaged in the conversation as soon as you can. Ruslan, just explain what you do in Moscow.
Well, Argo is a private equity fund. We run assets in oil and gas, agriculture, real estate. We are the largest Russian investors into Germany. We have trading operations, pretty diversified.
And Jean-Marc.
The EBRD is an international financial institution. It was set up in 1991 with an original mandate to finance the transition of the former planned communist economies of Eastern Europe. The region in which we operate has since evolved. We're now also active in places like Mongolia, Turkey, Greece, or more recently, the Mediterranean Rim, Egypt, Jordan, Tunisia, Morocco. Over the years, 25 years of history, we've invested 100 billion euros of our money and mobilized money of other investors going into this region. The CIS that we're talking about today was the recipient of about half that amount. Every year, 9 billion fresh money going into the region.
All right, Ruslan, again, literally in about a minute, if you can, your summary of where you think things are for the CIS, for Russia, and also the relationship and the potential that there is right across this enormous region.
I think overall the mood is pretty skeptical. One can say gloomy. However, there are significant opportunities.
A little bit more?
It depends on the sector that you want to look at, but there are opportunities in special situations. Economy is cash-strapped. There's not enough liquidity, so you can actually see a lot of companies that are in distress and are available for sale.
Is there certainty in your mind as an investor or not?
There is no certainty. There is no such thing as certainty in business, right, Nick? It's obvious.
You're certain there's no certainty then?
Absolutely.
All right. Now, let me ask you, Jean-Marc, to develop your thinking. Your job is to analyze both where things are, but also the potential. So let me, in the next 3 or 4 minutes, hear from you about the way you think things can now move and where the opportunities are, apart from the challenges that we've just heard from Ruslan. And please, if you've got any thoughts, do use the app and send me messages or comments.
I think, first of all, I think this is a strategic region that needs to be in the mind of every global investor going forward. 250, 280 million inhabitants, about 2 trillion of GDP at the moment, and that is a region that sits geographically in a very strategic spot in between Europe, China, and the Gulf countries here south to that region. The history of that region is actually an interesting one. It's been a good one. The transition to market economies that I was talking about before, I think has led to a significant transformation of that region, and I think in many respects can be judged as successful, even if not completely done yet. The history of the region is one that has been rewarding for investors. We, EBRD, have a long history of investing in that region, and it's been a good history. It's been one that has created good projects, but has also generated good returns. Looking at the future, and I'll come back at the present in a moment, we think that is a region that retains very interesting potential, upside potential. And that potential is going to be based on perhaps a different scenario than the one we have seen in the past. I think that potential is one that, first of all, from a trade and investment relationship point of view, has to be far more balanced, more global. This region has mostly looked at Europe in the past years, but Europe is not in an easy spot. There are signs of weakness in the Eurozone. There is some retrenchment by investors. This region has rightly looked at investors east, in Asia, China. China is evidently a big player, will be an even bigger player in this region, and has looked at investors from other areas, such as the Gulf countries, who have become increasingly investors in this area and have shown interests. So that is on the trade and investment relationship. As to the economies of this region, the big challenge is diversifying away from the over-reliance on natural resources, because that is where we are in a difficult spot at the moment. This region as a whole isn't growing at the moment. Russia is not in an easy situation. Growth is weak in a number of the other regions of the Caucasus and Central Asia. That's driven by global factors, overall economic slowdown, low oil price, China slowdown, and some broader geopolitical concerns. But it's also driven by some domestic factors. I think that is a challenge for the region. That is creating a new imperative to rethink what in the future are going to be the driver of growth.
Before I go to Ruslan, can I just ask you, looking through many of the documents, not just from the EBRD, but from the World Bank, there's been this emphasis in the last few years, diversify. In other words, brackets, don't assume that energy and oil will keep you going. Just before I move on to Ruslan, Jean-Marc, what do you see as the diversification, the willingness to accept that diversification is needed at the moment and perhaps could have been done before?
It's long been on the agenda, and I think it is entirely recognized by these countries that this is a challenge. Obviously, it is never quite a good time to do this. When natural resources prices are high, you can afford to continue thinking and effectively postpone. When natural resources prices are low, you have other emergencies to deal with. I think the challenge, it's all about opening up the economy to other sectors. It is about attracting investors, but also technology, know-how, experience that investors from around the globe, including from the Gulf, can bring to these regions. It's about skills, it's about education, it's about governance. Let me expand on that. It's about creating the right investment climate that is going to make this region appealing to you that is going to make this region a place where doing business in any sector, agribusiness, manufacturing, or services, is going to be straightforward and effective. It's about boosting competitiveness. There's been a genuine effort. If you look at tables that are published regularly by the World Economic Forum, they have a competitiveness table, or by the World Bank, they have a doing business table. You will see that places like Russia, Kazakhstan, some countries in the Caucasus have actually done genuine efforts to make their country more welcoming environments for investors.
Thanks, Jean-Marc. Ruslan, I've got one question here already. Keep the questions coming, please. We've got literally about 30 minutes to run on this session, so don't sit on your hands and say I didn't get you to ask the question. There's one question here already prompted by the kind of remarks we've heard from you both. Can you tell us about possible hospitality and real estate development, and what's the expected return, particularly with the current currency situation in Russia? But obviously that's around the CIS as well. What are you looking at the moment as opportunity as opposed to risk?
I can tell you that we own a few hotels. As an example, I can give an example of a 4-star hotel that we own in Moscow. It has very high utilization. We're looking into high 80s, 90s. Obviously, what has happened with the devaluation of the currency is a lot of tourists have started to show up in Moscow, particularly from Asian countries. We see a lot of Chinese. It used to be more Europeans, the Swedes, the Germans, but now we see a lot of Chinese. Our expected returns, since we are a special situations fund, are actually higher than one would expect. But we'll look into early or high 20s if we can. That would be the target that we'll look at.
Look more broadly then about where you're seeing opportunities. We are talking about synergies, not just the gloomy assessment you gave in your first 30 seconds,
Sure.
but where is the upside here potentially? Where are you thinking that there's opportunity now, building on what Jean-Marc has said?
We're looking very closely to transport because obviously the economy has to function. Any economy will function, therefore goods will be transported. And also one thing that one can keep in mind is that the tariffs for transport are actually counted in US dollars. They may be nominated in rubles, but they're counted in dollars. Therefore, you still are kind of hedged against the currency risk. We'll look at trading. We've been at one point in time, we were a big trader in oil and oil products, but now we see a significant opportunity in soft commodities. Grain, for example, is doing well. And hospitality is another market that we see developing. We're much more skeptical about, we have assets in heavy machinery. We're much more skeptical about something that is capital intensive and takes longer time to complete.
What about the adaptability, picking up on what Jean-Marc has said? I mean, as I said, reading World Bank reports, there's been this encouragement for diversification, maybe the agricultural sector, other sectors as well, but it hasn't really happened, this assumption that in the CIS, energy and oil will keep everything going in the right direction. Do you see the ability to adapt quickly?
Well, usually one thing that we debated among ourselves is that financial crises, they mature for a much longer time than people think, but they occur much faster than people think. So the adaptability has to be very short term, and it's those who adapt very fast who survive. Therefore, it's not a matter of choice. You either adapt or you're dead.
I think it's putting a crisis is always, it's a bad thing, but it can also be a good thing. And it can be a good thing in forcing the thinking and creating an imperative for change. Now, adaptability, I think, is going to take a little longer. It's not instant. Russia at the moment is under a sanction regime. There might be an upside there in local companies taking advantage of this. I'm thinking agribusiness, I'm thinking manufacturing, chemicals. But the lead time to build that capacity, to cultivate more land, to create more processing, more distribution facility is going to take, I think, a little longer. This is something of probably a few years, but it's something that's got to be started, that's got to be energized straight away. And that represents, again, opportunities for investors.
I'm getting some questions coming in. Ruslan, do you want to pick up on what Jean-Marc has just said?
Just one comment, Jean-Marc. I think You're absolutely right. It takes a couple of years to prepare. I think, unfortunately, we don't have the luxury to spend a couple of years. With the rates that the Russian businessmen are burning cash, they will be bankrupt before they will build sound business models. So you're absolutely right, but unfortunately, we don't have that luxury.
All right, I'm getting good questions. If you'd like to give me your name, then there's a good chance I can ask you to ask the question in person. It would be great to not have everything anonymously, but I'm happy to ask questions even if you don't want to be recognized. Let me, just before going to some more specific ones, Kazakhstan is having an election on the 20th of March. What about the ability of the political systems to handle this? What's your view, Ruslan? Because every country has elections. It's not unique to the CIS. There are many other countries having elections as well. But in adversity, obviously there's a lot of expectations on the political leaderships.
Well, it's a tough spot to comment on the political life of Kazakhstan, right? There's probably many different perspectives on this, but I would hope that the pressure on politicians to make fast choices will at the same time not be perceived by them as something that, I don't want them to act in terms of impetus. They still have to think about longer term horizons. While you think about the short-term crisis, they have to still think about long-term horizon. They still need to make structural changes about which Jean-Marc has mentioned. They need to diversify from oil and gas. So I don't know how the Kazakhs will be debating about this, but I can tell you that in Azerbaijan, for example, that's a huge debate.
We are going to be debating this in the session at 11:30. Please do.
On Kazakhstan, we have a remarkably good story. Last year, we've invested 700 million in that country, and we've truly established a partnership with the government there, where they are putting some of their resources to help support, create the environment to make some of these projects happening. So there's a strategic partnership. There's about 40 million euros that the Kazakh government has brought to the EBRD to help prepare projects, to create a network of business advisory services that are specifically servicing small and medium-sized enterprises in the region, that helps create better municipal, separate topic, better municipal infrastructure in various secondary cities. So there's an intelligent use of grant money to make good investment projects, both in the public and in the private sector, happening. I think it's quite an enlightened view of going forward.
I've got specific questions coming in, but just picking up what we heard Ruslan say, saying there's no luxury of a couple of years. Jean-Marc, your assessment economically as to how quickly the right diversification can take place to generate the new opportunities, because Ruslan says a couple of years is actually, we don't have that luxury.
Well, I'd like to think otherwise, but I don't think it's an instant process. So, we have to sit out this crisis, hope that it's not going to wreck these countries completely. I don't have a crystal ball. I'm in no position to forecast the oil price or other critical event that will impact on this. But as I just described from Kazakhstan, you can take things in your own hands and ensure you mobilize as much investment as possible. This is why we're having this event here, to talk to a region where there is capital and there is search for good opportunities. This is why there is, and rightly so, much talk about the Chinese One Belt, One Road initiative. Infrastructure investment to boost growth, to provide an immediate economic boost, but also a long-term benefit to this region by having more efficient routes to trade, I think are key measures that are already taking place.
All right. We've got 25 minutes to run. Ruslan, again, you did say no luxury of a couple of years. You've just heard from Jean-Marc, you've got to be patient and realistic. What about the tension there? Can it be resolved somehow between what you want as an investor and the reality of the economic cycle?
Let's step back and look at this from the sort of capital perspective, right? There are three basic rules of capital. Capital is never static, capital is fluid, and capital hopefully compounds. So it's all about the urgency by which you want to compound your capital. Right now, we're talking about the situation in which the investors have to be greedy when others are fearful, and fearful when others are greedy, right? At this point in time, we are greedy because we see that a lot of people are fearful. Therefore, I think the tension may be there, but again, coming back to my point, a lot of key business decisions are made at times of discontinuity. And we should not make any mistake. What we are seeing right now in the CIS is a major discontinuity. I think it is at the same scale as similar to what happened in 1991. So to a certain extent, it's either now or maybe, again, 25 years from now.
Okay. Right, let me give you some of the specific questions to both of you. Which industries do you see developing or thriving after 2020 in the CIS region? I have no idea why it's 2020 as opposed to 2019 or 2025, but which industries do you see developing or thriving? Ruslan?
I hope to see private equity thriving, because basically when you talk about the operational effectiveness of the businesses and you think about the structural deficiencies of the businesses, there has to be pressure put on the companies to perform. Therefore, I would hope to see a lot more private equity present in the CIS.
But private equity invests in industries and businesses. What kind of industries do you see developing and thriving?
I see transport. I think we will see, again, oil and gas developing. Whatever the regime, oil and gas will stay the mainstay of the economy by 2020. There is no way for us to get rid of this. Everything else remains to be seen. Again, Nick, in a way, it's very difficult to predict what's going to happen in 2020.
But there are people out there who are wanting to make a bet on certain options for investment. If we look at the positives here, help us understand where you think, given what you're doing in Russia, there can be positives, and which areas beyond oil and energy you would be focusing on?
Transport, real estate, trading.
And we'll be talking about some of these specifically in other sessions. Jean-Marc?
I think you have a region there that has, I said it before, 280 million inhabitants. There's still some income convergence to take place. There is domestic demand. So I would think very simple things, consumer goods, agribusiness, any type of manufacturing is an area I would definitely look at. Infrastructure, logistics, as Ruslan just mentioned, but infrastructure, a lot of the infrastructure needs will have to be taken on by the private sector. This is not just the public sector or other countries investing in infrastructure. The sovereign budgets won't be able to bear it. So infrastructure, construction and operation, I think, is another area that I think is of great interest. We tend to think less in terms of sectors and more in terms of where are the right entrepreneurs, where is the right business with the right governance, the right transparency in the supportive investment climate. I think that is the driver of success rather than deciding whether you go into car manufacturing, paper, chemicals, or pharmaceuticals.
What about the concept of the CIS? A question here, no name. CIS is a concept rather than a reality. It has never really managed to become a fully functioning economic unit. It's an organization, according to this question, of missed opportunities. Traditionally, Moscow acted as a hub for companies to manage their CIS operations. Here's an idea. Could Dubai potentially take up that role? First of all, do you accept the analysis? It's an organization of missed opportunities, which does and after all, many of us here, I think, come from the European Union, where there are still problems of coordination. But does it need coordination, do you think, Ruslan, or not?
I fully agree. I still remember on December the 8th, 1991, when the Soviet Union was collapsing, the presidents of Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus at the time issued a joint communique, and they said that USSR ceases to exist as a subject of international law and as a geopolitical reality. I think CIS is not a subject of international law. It is not a geopolitical reality. It is, in a way, a figment of imagination. It is an intellectual edifice. There are substantial differences between Russia and Ukraine on one hand, for example, or one can think about the Eurasian Economic Union on one hand, and the so-called Guam countries, which are Georgia, Ukraine, Azerbaijan, and Moldova. And after the conflicts that we have observed between Russia on one hand and Georgia, and then Russia on one hand and Ukraine, and unfortunately now Russia and Turkey, which again is very close to Azerbaijan for obvious reasons, I think CIS becomes even more of a phantom. I think the opportunity...
Of a phantom, did you say?
Phantom. It does not exist, right? It's an intellectual construct. I think the opportunities for the GCC countries are quite significant in this regard, because the GCC countries bring politically unengaged capital, which essentially we would hope would come with no strings attached, and that's something that the CIS countries actually need.
So let's just be clear, your view is that those who want to do deals or investigate or look at the potential, they've really got to deal with individual sovereign states and nations as opposed to thinking of a commonwealth?
Well, the first view has to be obviously the importance of politics is such that a decision needs to be made based on the understanding of specific political environment in which you're operating. Otherwise, if you just look at the business landscape, you would be doing a disservice to yourself, right? You would not be understanding. There is no decision without a context, and the key driver of context in CIS is the political environment.
Here we are at the initiative of the Dubai Chamber of Commerce. I mean, what's your view, and that's in that question, there are 2 or 3 other questions, suggesting that Dubai could have a role here of coordination. Can you see that happening?
Sure. I mean, one of the key reasons why I'm here, just as an example, right? Later in the day, I was hoping to see my friend Sultan bin Sulayem, right? You start developing these personal relationships, you start doing some kind of business together, you start socializing, and you start to trust each other. And I think the GCC countries have a unique role in a way. They are substantially removed from the political infighting, but at the same time they're close enough to understand the overall environment and bring enough capital.
All right, we're talking about the reorientation of CIS business. Let's explore that. But first, that first question, Jean-Marc, about that really the CIS is a commonwealth of missed opportunities. How are you seeing it from EBRD headquarters? Are you seeing it as nation states essentially kind of loosely joined in something called the CIS with a potential for fragmentation? How should those out there see all this going forward?
I think they are nation states, and Ruslan explained why this is still a dominating feature. I think the benefits of integration among those countries and the Eurasian Economic Union is a first attempt at that, is actually good. I think these countries benefit from opening up for trade, for free movement of labor, and further economic integration among countries that historically used to be very closely tied, and economic partners makes a lot of sense. The GCC, I think, is a very good example of that, and there is a lot to emulate there.
I'm getting a lot of questions here, so I'm going to move forward pretty quickly. We've got 16 minutes to run. Just building on that question about governance and separate nations, again, no name here. Are there, Ruslan, both of you actually, is there a need for structural change in the region to be able to accommodate change, whether it be the CIS or actually individual nation states?
I think, again, I would think about each nation state individually. I think each of the states will walk its own path. a key wild card remains how will Russia react in the political environment. That has huge ramifications for the entire business landscape.
I think it's all about how that region, CIS, Central Asia, Eurasia, is going to be able to globalize and rebalance its relationship. We mentioned that at the beginning. It's about China, it's about the Gulf, it's about Europe and the Americas. But I think the Gulf and Asia have a key role to play there. And you have the integration within, but you have the integration with the neighbors. And all of that is tied together, if you want, with physical links. And this is about this new Silk Road plan. Lots of little patches of infrastructure that effectively are going to constitute a network that this region is truly going to benefit from. And I think Gulf countries have a role to play in.
And Andrea is going to be discussing that in the next session about the transport corridors. Let's talk about connectivity. There's a question here. Transport is a broad sector. Can you comment on the opportunities you see in aviation? Can one invest in such a way to serve the region, or does it have to be by country? And we are, after all, in a nation state which is developing significant connectivity, but many people, in order to fly between CIS states, are coming via the Gulf.
Jean-Marc, you?
We wish, you know, as a frequent traveler, I wish there was this regional network. It is true that this is not easy.
But you accept it's a weakness?
It is a weakness. Airline is not an easy business to invest in. We've tried, and we haven't always been successful at this sort of attempts. And there probably is a role here for a place like Dubai to be a key hub. I think this is inescapable.
From my perspective, I used to be running one of the largest private transportation companies in Russia. I think airlines is a very difficult business. We personally do not think we will be well suited to run this business. Profitability remains very cyclical. Therefore, from our humble perspective, we would stay away from airlines. However, we would look at other transport-related sectors such as railway, shipping. The rates are very low. There are some interesting buying opportunities. So that's how I would think about it.
All right. Yazid Patel, could I just encourage you? You're making a very interesting point in your remarks here about energy and alternative energy. Where are you? Could I ask you to use the microphone possibly to ask that question? I think it's really, could you step aside? Would you mind? And also the representative from Skyline University. You make a very important point. Rakesh, where are you? Rakesh, please, could you step aside? Use that microphone. And also, I want to ask some other questions, but you make a very important point about education. One technical question here for you, Jean-Marc, about the EBRD, about the way you finance infrastructure in the region. And the second one, in most countries, EBRD operations, the biggest problem is startups and project preparation stage. Would you encourage governments to co-finance this particular stage? Two questions about the EBRD.
So how do we finance? We finance on a commercial basis, but with maturities or simply funding availability that otherwise isn't there. Our aim is not to compete away commercial and private sources of money. It's to mobilize them, and it's to add to them and close the gap. So typically for infrastructure, you're talking long-term debt, commercially structured, commercially priced. You may consider forms of subordinated or equity. We can do that whole range of financing. But you can pretty much think about this as commercial financing that takes the extra risk that commercial bankers won't necessarily want to take in this region.
And you're available for more discussions afterwards?
Absolutely.
All right. Is it Yazid? Yeah, on solar power.
Yes. Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah. My question is directed to Ruslan, more on Russia. I'd like to know what is the opportunity, or is there any opportunity to invest into solar power plants in Russia, both from a technical as well as a business perspective? Does it make business sense to invest into solar in Russia, considering the solar radiation? Does it make a profitable venture? That's my question.
Thank you.
We'll look at solar
And
about...
could I just ask Yazed, where are you? Could I get...
That's me.
Okay.
That's me.
Okay. Good. Please.
We looked at solar about a year ago. We decided not to invest just because the cycle is too long. And our cost of capital is very high. I don't know what your cost of capital is, so that depends a lot on what your specific circumstances are. We also think in terms of oil and gas, we are very skeptical on the prices. Therefore, we think that'll be huge competition in the way to alternative source of energy.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
But can I pick up on this? Because I think you're raising a very interesting subject, which is what is the future of energy more generally, and the role of renewables, and the role of simply energy efficiency investments, be they in the residential sector or in the industrial sector. The scope of this is huge. Actually, we tend to think...
Do you think that's realized at the moment, Jean-Marc?
It is not realized, but it's one thing to capitalize on. Energy efficiency investments and sustainable energy, which is energy efficiency as well as renewable, non-carbon-based renewables, is going to be 40% of EBRD's business by 2020. It's already a significant amount in the 30% today. These are investments that, energy efficiency in particular, that are paying off very, very quickly. It's a major source of competitiveness.
Do you fear, though, that even if there's a very clear message from the COP21 meeting in Paris in mid-December, that because energy prices are so low, that is discouraging people from thinking that way?
That is a problem. I agree. The incentives go not necessarily the right way if you're a user of energy and energy is cheap. But this remains a long-term strategic objective that is inescapable.
Are you Rakesh?
Yes.
Right, you've got a question about education.
Yeah, I'm from Skyline University based in Sharjah in UAE. My simple question is that during this entire forum, I've seen that the focus is either on renewable energy or on infrastructure. Why don't we focus something on which is on knowledge-based economy, wherein we create entrepreneurs rather than only someone who's seeking jobs? So how good an investment opportunity will be there in CIS country if we have to look into that option? We being in a university which is locally supported here by UAE government, approved by the ministry, in case we are looking for our expansions, what kind of opportunities are there?
All right, is that not being factored significantly enough into the assessments?
I think it's a major point. It's key to this challenge of diversification. How do you get knowledge, skills, new technology flowing into this region? So it touches on, policies for education, but it also touches on how do you support how do you create an ecosystem that supports enterprises, startups that are active in this area. Russia, I think, has taken a few initiatives there. They are actually remarkable success stories. Russia is one of the only countries that doesn't have Google as its major search engine. There's this company called Yandex that the EBRD had the good fortune of being associated with. Remarkable success story.
But how important, you're nodding, Ruslan, you're agreeing with that, but how important, what's your message? Education, broadening, building in the way that we've just heard. I was talking to our guests from Azerbaijan, and you're from Azerbaijan. Actually, you come from a country, although you're a Russian national, which is now amazingly connected.
Yeah, I think, when you think about the exports that the country can export, you think about goods, but there are also services that the country can export, and education is one of such services. Australia has built a big infrastructure for basically exporting its education. There's a lot of students, foreign nationals in Australia. From an investment perspective, we looked at online education courses because we're obviously not in the business of investing into universities. But that's a separate subject. But again, the potential is there. What we need to make sure is that the people who are well educated stay in those countries as opposed to being educated and leaving for the West.
And how do you do that? How do you persuade them to stay?
As one of my friends has joked about it, you only need 9 months and 21 years. It's a new generation of people.
Okay.
So, guten Morgen, salam alaikum, здравствуйте.
Здрасте.
Если вы разрешите, я буду задавать свой вопрос по-русски. Уважаемый Руслан и уважаемый Jen.
I can't hear you. It's talking in Russian.
He is.
Okay.
Yes.
I don't have a headset, so
Okay.
I don't think you can hear. Jean-Marc, please. Can you speak in English?
I speak, but my English isn't very good. So, I come from Germany. I can try, but it is better if I give my question in Russian language.
You need your
It's
headset.
okay for you?
You go ahead.
Okay.
It's okay for him.
That puts me at unfair advantage, I guess.
You'll understand. Okay.
Окей. Я с вами согласен и с уважаемым Дженом. Наша транспортная компания находится в Гамбурге. Я приехал из Германии. Как было здесь сказано, очень важный роль в развитии экономики играет стабильность. И слава Богу, вот где мы сейчас находимся, Дубай, Vereinigten Arabischen Emiraten, одна из стабильных и sicherer, то есть страна в этом регионе, поэтому и так развивается. Но, с другой стороны, Центральная Азия, если взять Таджикистан, Узбекистан, Туркменистан, Казахстан, там тоже есть, слава Богу, стабильность. Но развитие транспорта, с чем я очень интересуюсь, и логистика без стабильности и вообще экономики невозможно. Поэтому те фундаменталисты и радикалы, которые продвигаются через Пакистан в центральный регион, особенно в Центральной Азии, хотят дестабилизировать, почему, как вы думаете, будет развиваться экономика и какие челленджи и что?
All right. Okay, because time is short.
The question is, the gentleman has arrived from Hamburg. His question is, how does the instability and radicalism influence transport? I actually arrived from Hamburg as well. Probably we're on the same flight. I think it's a huge political debate. I don't know. We have 3 minutes remaining. I don't know if we can get into this, but obviously, if there is radicalism, there is no transport, because there is very little economy that would function.
Jean-Marc?
Not much to add.
All right. Anyone else want to come in using a microphone? I've got plenty of other questions here. What about the role of Dubai? I'm just picking up on that question we heard earlier. There are 3 or 4 other questions about, which is central to why we're here, about whether, if there are so many complex political issues between the CIS members, whatever they're members of, that actually something like Dubai could act as a place where it's a safe area to coordinate. Jean-Marc.
I think you can think of it in both ways. This is an interesting place to locate for a global business and to raise finance and to trade with the rest of the world for companies coming from the CIS. Conversely, and we see more and more of that, the CIS is an interesting destination for investors, financial or strategic, coming from the UAEs. We've actually seen over the past 2 years just under 10 projects that we have been investor in coming from the GCC region, investing into this region. We want to see more of that.
I think Dubai is, in this regard, a unique place. It's a trader nation. It's trader Islam. And as you know, in all serious business interactions, a lot of decisions are based on eyeball-to-eyeball conversations, right? You can bring a lot of lawyers. They would draft fantastic contracts. But essentially, it's about trusting each other. And here in Dubai, we feel like we can trust the local nationals, and I hope that they can feel that they can trust us.
All right. In the last minute, I just want to pick up on education and skills, which both of our speakers have talked about, and there are pickups already from the remarks you've made. So very quickly, will you invest in education and online as a way forward and something which will give you returns? And secondly, a business literacy problem in this region, especially in the SME sector. What do you think could be done to actually increase capacity for both of you? Jean-Marc.
So SME, I'll pick up that one because it matters a lot to us. We think is key. That is effectively the economic backbone all of these countries
What needs to be done?
Have to rely on. Key for SMEs is not just throwing finance at them, not just throwing debt at them, it's having access to finance and access to equity, but more importantly, access to good advice, project preparation, services, and skills. And we at the EBRD have a very wide network of small business advisory services operating throughout the map in many secondary cities that services exactly those needs of SMEs.
So Ruslan, the business of skills and education, is that a business opportunity?
As a business, probably not. We looked at online courses. Coursera is for free as a short report. So as a charity and service to humanity, yes. As a business, probably not. In terms of small and medium enterprises, one thing that I want to pick back on Jean-Marc's comment, I think it's a fantastically serious problem. We talk about diversifying the economy. The question we have is, who are those people who are going to be diversifying the economy, right? And the skill set is absolutely incomparable to the challenges that the businesses face. My wife actually happens to run a chain of restaurants and cafes and all that kind of thing. So I think there's 10 or 11 of them. And if you think about it from the other side, right, not from the big business perspective, but from small and medium enterprise perspective, I think this is, in a way, a bastardized part of the economy. In a way, nobody cares about small and medium enterprises, and that's a huge problem.
All right. I have to stop it. I'm rather reluctant to because we're just getting going, but there's much more to discuss in many other of the sessions. Ruslan and Jean-Marc, thank you very much indeed. But do take this as seeing where there are new opportunities, even if time is short, as Ruslan has said, but the EBRD is certainly making sure that there are new opportunities and is putting its money to invest in certainly developing skills and other capacities. For the moment, thank you very much indeed. Let me invite Andrea back onto the platform. Thank you. And keep the messages coming.
Please remain in your seats for the next session.